I'll speak first, as the previous two speakers did, of my personal connection to and my personal relationship with the late John Bruton. He was obviously, in Meath, a neighbour of Cavan, and I knew him as a neighbour. I knew him on a social level. I was in the Shannon while he was deputy leader of the party. He would have visited my home in Ballyborough on social basis, and in fact he was a guest at our wedding. He was a lovely individual on a personal level, and I want to speak to that first. He was extraordinarily good-humoured, extraordinarily witty, extraordinarily intelligent. His intelligence was legendary. Such was such was his intelligence that he thought beyond. He thought on a different plane. He thought very quickly. He responded to things extraordinarily. I remember one of the staff. I was very friendly with one of his personal staff. In fact, I was talking to him yesterday that we would meet after the funeral. But I was friendly with one of his staff in his office, one of his special advisors, but I met another one of them recently at the Dublin Bay South special breakfast, and he said to me, our difficulty in the office with John when he was Taoiseach was to keep up with his ideas. His ideas ran ahead of us. We were trying to factor and process his ideas when he was long moved on to another idea, and our job wasn't so much to advise him as to some way race after him. He was extraordinary on that level. So that's another way I knew him personally. His wife Finola was in college with me and was a wonderful fellow student at that time, a lovely, lovely lady, and in fact her mother was involved in the Wheelchair Association with my wife, and they were visitors at our home often in that context as well. And Finola's a lovely, lovely lady, and so that neatly brings me to make the point that John was a wonderful family man. His family was everything to John, and he was completely devoted to family. In the midst of his public life, family remained paramount, and his love of family, his interest in them, and he got animated talking about his family on any social occasion you met him. But I want to turn now to John the politician, John the public figure. And I want to say that he, first of all, and it's a given across the board and everyone, and I was very impressed by the latter speaker's remarks about him as well, coming from another perspective, but that he was totally devoted to public service. His commitment to public service was unambiguous. He was an extraordinary orator. I mean, his oratorical skills were legendary. I'd imagine there was no competitor for that other than the great James Dillon as a speaker. And in fact, his great friend who died last week, John Connor in Roscommon, would be in that mould too, but John stood out as an orator. I remember at the parliamentary party meetings, it was something to hear him. He had absolute integrity. Absolute integrity. His word was his bond. There was no mealy-mouthedness. There was no ambiguity. What John said he meant, he knew. And if you had a conversation with him, you left that conversation. If you were coming to petition for your constituency, for your own self, for whatever, or for a group of people, you left that room with a non-ambiguous, unequivocal answer from him. And it was a yes or a no, and if it was a yes, it was a yes. If it was a no, it was a no. His integrity was extraordinary. He had a political slogan at one stage that every person counts, was his mantra or party slogan on one particular election. Well, with John Bruton, every person did count. And that was one extraordinary aspect of him, that whether he was talking to somebody, supposedly every person's extraordinary, but somebody who in our definition of things was ordinary, he had the same respect for that person, the same rapport with them, and the same approach to them as if they were the one of the great and the mighty. And that was one of his amazing attributes. I've seen him in action like Like Regina, I was up in Meath at events, and Regina would remember me there. I was at many events in Meath, many events where he was in the room, where I was at, and when he was socialising in the room and meeting people in the room, and he would have the same respect for the most obsequious, uncelebrated member in the back row as he had for the person who saw themselves as great and mighty. So every person did count for him. He brought great dedication and creativity to every office he held. And he held multiple ministries, but he was never happy to go into a ministry, knock in the time, and come out at the other end unscathed. That was not his approach. He was proactive, he was creative, he was innovative, and in fact, I'd imagine the civil servants would have spent a lot of time trying to restrain him, because he would have been out there doing it. He didn't stand, he didn't go in and say, I'm here just to get to knock my time in, get the 4 years through. That was not his approach. As a Taoiseach, he did something that was unheard of at the time and that was not expected. He led a coalition of the Democratic left, with the Democratic left in it, which were his it was assumed that they were so ideologically diverged from him that he would have a difficulty leading that coalition. The expectation among the pundits was that that coalition would not last. In fact, such was his respect for others, such was his intellectual capacity to think beyond, outside the box, and to look at another person's point of view, that in fact he led that coalition in an excellent fashion and kept that coalition together, and that coalition was very united under him, and they worked with great mutual respect and without mutual suspicion, and this coalition was an extraordinary success. Now coalitions are the norm throughout Europe. Now they're the norm here. But at that time they were not the norm, and he was a pioneer in that sphere alone. And that was a very, very important contribution to democracy. And he was such a Democrat. But it was an extraordinarily important contribution to the continuity of democracy, not only here but abroad. It was his capacity to respect others and his intellectual breadth that delivered on that. He left the economy after that coalition in robust health. And he then, during that coalition, handled the peace process with extraordinary commitment, extraordinary skill, extraordinary sincerity. I remember him being up in Cavan one day on a tour of the constituency, having to interrupt the tour, much to the chagrin and annoyance of a lot of the members there who wouldn't get this stuff, and they were really angry. But he had to abandon the tour because there was a crisis in the peace process, or what could be a crisis. And he interrupted and he said the peace process is paramount, and he left the tour and went on phones to work on what was the issue at the time. During that time, he done something that was very, very important, and one has to, of course, in the context of the peace process, acknowledge the great work of so many others, but we're talking about him today. But he done something very important, and that will have to be done as we aspire to united Ireland and this country now. He reached out to unionism. And that was courageous, and that was unpopular at the time, and that led to him receiving a lot of unfair criticism, misunderstanding around it. He had to reach out to unionism because it was important that he won the respect of unionism, but he did that. But he also held the respect of Republicans through that, and he navigated the peace process with extraordinary skill and extraordinary talent. And he respected all traditions, and he had that capacity to put himself in other people's shoes, and he did it very well. And it was again unexpected. As it was unexpected that he would lead a coalition so effectively, it was similarly unexpected that he would be such an architect, continued the architecture of the peace process, continued the process, and he did that with extraordinary skill. He latterly was, and you referenced this yourself, last Cathaoirleach, EU ambassador to the US. And I know anecdotally, I know from people around, we all had the privilege of going to America at various points. We all have various connections in America. I mean, who hasn't here in this room many cousins, many friends in America? And I would have known anecdotally that he made an extraordinary impact in Washington. He, again, no more in his ministries, no more in his Taoiseachship. He was not in Washington for a jolly. He was creative, he propagated the EU there in a very effective way. And he was at all times, he was a very apt ambassador for the EU because he was a passionate European. He really believed in the European project. He would have been very depressed about Brexit. He would have been so saddened by Brexit. He believed in the European project. He believed in peace, in building a peaceful world, in building a good economy for people. And he had a real passion for Europe in that regard. So all in all, a great human being, great family man, an exceptional political leader. It was just an honour to know him, and you couldn't but be impressed by him. I've yet to meet a person that might say we diverged from his political aspirations or his political views. Of course you meet that, but I've yet, in all of my years, to meet a person who questioned his integrity, his commitment to public service, his innate human decency. And I want, in a very special way, first of all, to express my sympathy to Finola, having known her through college, having met her on many occasions with them, and having known her mum and her extended family. Finola is she is actually a cousin married in Cavantown as well, a very lovely lady. And my sympathy to Finola, my sympathy to Matthew, to Juliana, to Emily, to Mary Elizabeth. Of course, to our colleague here in the Oireachtas, for whom this has to be a shattering and such a difficult time, to Richard Bruton, to his wife Mary, and to the extended family. So I just want to say, yes, Jay, Garawa Animus, Goramagat the girl.